Meeting to order. First thing on the agenda is to read the Land, Water, and Life Acknowledgement Statement. The town of Durham, New Hampshire wishes to acknowledge the spiritual and physical connection maintained by the Pennacook, Abenaki, and Wabanaki peoples to Indakina, homeland, Aki, land, Nibi, water, and Lulawikak, flora, and Awasak, fauna. New Hampshire has been home to these indigenous peoples for thousands of years. The residents of Durham acknowledge the ongoing hardships endured by our indigenous neighbors after the loss of their unceded homelands, which we now steward, and we will work to foster relationships to support the well-being of indigenous people who carry forward the traditions of their ancestors. Okay, let's do our roll call here.
Steve Moyer, alternate.
Wayne Burton.
Ann Lightbody, alternate.
John Naturally.
Dwight Trueblood, chair.
Erin Hale, vice chair.
Nick Lanzer.
Neil Slepian.
Michael Barron, town planner. And Jacob Cragg cannot make it tonight.
Okay. And I think we have a quorum then. We've got everyone here, so there's no need to seat any alternates. And the agenda, approval of the agenda. Has everyone had a chance to look it over?
I'd like to make an amendment to the agenda unless other folks have some thoughts about it. The plant species, site plan regulations. I was hoping to be able to talk to Roanne before we discuss this, but I have not been able to do that. So I don't know if anybody else has made any progress in the plant species since our last discussion about it. I'm just not sure if we need to talk about it. That was my...
You know what
Michael?
I'll do? Because
Yeah.
this has been hanging around a little bit. How about for the next meeting, I'll dig into it and I'll make a specific recommendation.
Okay, that sounds great.
So is the motion to strike this item from the agenda?
Yeah, I wanted to first just see if anybody else wanted to keep it in, but I guess I would make a motion at this point to strike it from the agenda, yes.
And put it off until next meeting in December?
Or when Michael has a chance to, to take a look at it, yeah.
Do we have a second to that?
I'll second.
Okay, all those in favor of striking number 10, plant species and site plan regulations from the agenda this week?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. So-
And the minutes from September actually were approved. They weren't marked because Karen was waiting to hear about Muddy Pete. And we confirmed that that is real, so they were
Okay.
approved.
Okay.
I would note, though, that we haven't seen meeting minutes from the last meeting.
October, right, and those
Yeah.
will be at your next one.
Okay, all right, very good. No one's here for public comments, so we can move on to the land stewardship update. Is that you, Michael?
Well, clearly we haven't hired somebody. I know Todd is looking. I don't have any updates, though.
Okay.
Would this be an appropriate time just to give a quick update about the education work that we've been doing with land stewardship, or should I wait to other business? What do you
Well,
think?
we've got the time, so
Okay.
we'll be within that 5-minute time slot, and it's about land stewardship, so go ahead.
Yeah, great. So, so Sarah and I had been working on sort of the education subcommittee group, not an official subcommittee, just the education working group. We did hold 3 walks in collaboration with the Durham Parks and Recs committee. And as we were saying just before the meeting started, we've had great attendance at all 3 of these walks. The last one was the Lichen Walk with Jeremy Howell came up from, he's a student at New York City College, I believe, and led a walk all about lichen. We had over 40 people there, I think, in Stevens Woods. So we're going to continue this collaboration with Durham Parks and Rec through the winter and hopefully spring seasons as well. And Sarah and I have batted around some ideas for winter walks, but I think we haven't confirmed any of those. So if anybody on our committee here has any thoughts about what would make a great winter walk. One of our ideas is to do a full moon snowshoe hike at some point. And we were thinking maybe a history walk at some point in places maybe where there were some rock walls and other things we could see in the winter time. But if folks have ideas for winter walks, I would welcome them. Yeah.
Aaron, one thing that might be fun
Yeah.
if we get snow this winter would be to do an animal track
Yes,
walk.
tracking. That is another one that we have discussed.
Oh, good.
Yes, yeah. Thank you for that, Neil. Yeah, so the tracking walk and the snowshoe we've talked about. Again, kind of snow dependent, but but hopefully by February we'd have some snow on the ground, I would think. Yeah.
UNH has done a lot of research, right, out in
Yeah.
Thompson. You know, they were doing the
Yes, yeah.
snow research the last few years. I don't know if they're going to continue that this year, but
Okay.
that would be very interesting to go out
That
and,
would be great.
you know, do that. And I also,
Yeah.
you know, they have that research tower there that I thought it would be great to
Mm-hmm.
lead the Conservation Commission there sometime to see what they're doing for CO2 research and.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, we had, originally, because this was in collaboration with Parks and Rec, we had kind of conceived it as, and it's called Discover Durham Trails. We had originally thought, oh, these are going to be town lands. But I think it's a great opportunity to think about our partnership with UNH and the lands that are just available to residents. So that's a great idea. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, yeah, Anne.
I tried to pitch Sarah on doing a geology walk at Adams Point, which I think would be really interesting and not necessarily snow dependent.
Yes,
And it
yeah.
also occurs to me this is the 50th anniversary of the refinery. And so I'm wondering if there could be like a sweet trail, I don't know, sort of a tie-in to that.
That's a very cool idea.
Which
Yeah.
might get
Yeah.
also bring more people in to appreciate what we have.
Okay, that's wonderful. Thanks. Yeah, great ideas.
Oh, Ann, do you know, that's great to hear. Do you know, so 2025 will be the 50th anniversary? Do you know of a, or 2024? Do
I
you
thought
know
it was
which
2024.
particular
I thought it was
event
2024.
It's this year.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Was it, do you know which event? Was it the final vote or?
The final vote, the town meeting, I thought was
think so.
1974.
I'm not totally clear
I
on it.
recently read Small
what
Town
that
Big
was.
Oil, and so, should be an expert on this, but I was not a town resident at the time, so
Yeah.
I can't speak from
Neither was
personal
I.
experience.
I just know that people gave it a thumbs down.
Great,
Neil.
thank you.
I can provide a 2-minute relating of something that has to do with land stewardship. So I'm on the land stewardship subcommittee as an alternate. And one of the proposals for next year is to keep improving the trails. Like, there were some of the plank boardwalks were updated over on the Sweet Trail. So one of the areas of concern is in Oyster River Forest in the meadow. There's a beaver activity has flooded what had previously been, a walkway, and so the point of this is that we did a site walk with the Land Stewardship Subcommittee about 2 weeks ago to go take a look at that. Because there's going to be a request for funds to build a bridge next year, so that will come before this committee. And then we walked further in the woods toward where the Oyster River Trail joins with the Oyster River Trail part that's in College Woods, because there's some plank bridges that are very low to the ground, and in the spring they get flooded as well. So that's the second part of what we'll be asking to do. So just FYI.
In the past, we've approached UNH on that, and that's their territory, so they wanted to handle that themselves. The ones on Durham property, we funded and built, but...
Yeah, on the Durham side I'm talking about, John.
Okay,
Yeah, not when you cross over
okay,
onto the UNH side.
okay.
That seems pretty well set up on the UNH side right now.
Yeah, so the bridges, I guess in question are where there's a lack of bridges and there's mud, because I think the bridges that we put in probably 6 or 7 years ago, seem to be holding up very well.
The ones in the woods.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, those are in good shape. But then prior to those bridges, there's just some planks that are basically laid on the ground.
Oh,
And-
yeah.
In the field.
No,
in the woods.
That was part of the project, was the trail architect that we brought in to do that, suggested that design. for
Oh, I
those.
see.
So that
Okay.
was part of the design, to have those lower planks put in there. There's additional areas around those planks, though, that are not protected at all. So I think that's the area that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, that's true. Like,
I'd just like to note for the record that Richard Kelly has joined us, so that they can catch that for the attendance portion of the minutes. My understanding from Michael is that the 4 Riverview Court conditional use application has been postponed to December 23rd. But can you remind me at the end of the meeting that we should do sort of a census of how many people are planning to be here on December 23rd,
Right.
given the proximity to Christmas?
Unless we want to try to change the date next month?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. That may be something, but let's
Yeah.
put that off to the end of the meeting to deal with, maybe under other business.
Right.
Okay.
Change it to the 25th.
All right, so the next item on the agenda is something I put on here. It's the Conservation Commission preparation for the annual report. I received an email from the town office indicating that, well, I think it's November 6th, December 6th, I'm jumping around here. I need to have a written submission to her for the annual report that the town puts together. And I was digging through the files I had from last year and came across Jake's Conservation Commission annual update. And I think you all should have copies of that. And I didn't want to do this myself without, I thought it would be good to have the commission sort of weigh in as to what they see, you guys see as major accomplishments that we might want to highlight in the annual report this year. We only have about 30 minutes to sort of talk about ideas and stuff, so feel free to mention things. But I will point out that the way Jake organized the annual report from us, which I thought was a very useful one, was he went through the town's goals from last year and essentially took each of those goals that applied to what the Conservation Commission does and listed the accomplishments under each of those goals, so that there is a connection between the things that we're doing and what the town council has sort of put forward as the goals, overall goals for the town. So I thought that was a very good approach, and I'm thinking that that is the best way to organize the next annual report. If anyone has any other ideas that they would like to see used, we can do that. Other materials that are in your handouts that relate to this, in July, on the 15th, I gave a update to the town council about what we had accomplished over the last 6 months since Jake's last report out. And so those things are listed here as a bulleted list. They're not really integrated into the goals. Although I will note that one of the comments or questions I got when I gave this update from the town council was, they said, gee, did the town goals really help you guys think about the things that you're doing and guide you? And my response to that was, yes, it was very useful to have that, but I can't say that we actually intentionally looked at those goals and then said, oh, so what we're going to do as a commission this year is on each of these goals is X, Y, Z. It was really more of a, we have things that we do, and then we look at how those sort of fit into what the town has identified as high or priorities over the last year. And maybe that's something we can talk about later, next year, if you will, as we start thinking about what it is we want to try and accomplish in 2025 as to how we want to maybe organize that. And then the final thing was something Michael sent around, which was the Natural Resources Master Plan, goals and recommendations. And so I don't know if people have had a chance to sort of go through this and whether anything that was in here sort of triggered things in your mind as to what we may have accomplished related to any of these items. But I know we've looked at this a couple times, trying to work through and identify things that we don't get very far, and then we sort of put it on the bottom of the pile because we have a bunch of other things to do. But that's another resource here that we can look at as we're thinking through this. So I guess the first thing to do would be sort of open up the floor to people to comment on what they sort of see as major accomplishments that we've had this past year as a commission. And we can note what those are. And then I don't know that we need to, I mean, if you know what town goal it fits under, it would be really good for you to identify that. But if not, I'm more than willing, you know, once we have that list, I can go through and sort of coordinate that as I'm writing the short report back to the council as to which of those items it might relate to, goals it might relate to. So with that, I'll open the floor for any thoughts, comments on accomplishments. And if we don't get a whole lot, it's going to fall on me to just sort of look through. Oh, I forgot. There's also a recap of the agenda. That was the other thing that Michael sent around. He looked through all the agendas from the last year, and that should be, I don't know, did I see that here?
Yeah, agenda items.
I know I printed it out, so let me.
Can I make a comment, Dwight?
Yes, go ahead.
So in reading through Jake's presentation from 2023, are you saying that what's in italics is what the goals were that he's addressing?
Yes, those are specific goals that were listed in the town council's in 2023. And at the beginning, he noted that those goals came out after the commission started its yearly work. And so he just looked at the things that were done and sort of wrapped them into the things that the town council had put forward. Because I think that came out in late spring, maybe early summer.
June 3rd.
Yeah. Yeah. So, however, this is the first full year that we've had those goals given to us by the town council. I mean, we looked at them. We never really said, oh, you know, these are going to be high priorities. I really see it more as an organizational tool for the things that we do. We can fit them under there. However, going forward, we might want to think about a little bit. We don't need to do that today. I think that's, you know, this is for 2025. To essentially look at, pursue long-term environmental sustainability and resiliency, and then thought, you know, in our mind say, okay, what is the Concom going to do this year to do that? I don't think we need, you know, a whole raft of things, but, you know, a priority or two. And, you know, we could do that for each of these goals for the next year and see how that works. Or we can keep going forward, I guess, the way we are, which is doing the things that we do and then sort of wrap them into the things that the council has prioritized. However, my sense is that the reason they're putting out these priorities is that they would like to see the various commissions and planning boards and whatnot sort of identify, look at these and say, oh, these are priorities for the town. These are things that the commission, our commission could do to help support and get those accomplished. That's the sense I'm getting from my brief interactions with the council on these. I don't know if Michael has a better sense of that, from his working day to day in the town office, but
I think that sounds good.
Yeah, I mean, just one more comment. There is not a lot of very specific accomplishments in Jake's list, except for there's a few on the back page. Nick's presentation and the indigenous foraging rights policy. But for the most part, at least on the first page under 2023 accomplishments, under each of the items in italics, it's really more kind of general statements and not so much, real specifics. And that's just the way I see it, just from, a quick reading. And I do remember when this came out. So I guess I would ask, Dwight, whether you would rather organize it toward, more specific things, such as Michael has provided in the, in the recap of agenda items. Would it make more sense to you, or would you have a better, or would you rather do it more specifically, or would you rather organize it more generally?
okay, so what I was thinking was with the recap materials, as an example, I can take each one of those and look at these goals and say which one of these items on the agenda sort of fit under a particular town goal.
You kind of retrofit them, basically.
Yeah, retrofit them. And that way, it's sort of, when the annual report is sort of looked at, people can say, oh, well, I see where the Conservation Commission's activities are sort of fulfilling the goals that the town council has put forward. Now, if it doesn't fit, then we don't have to include it, or we can include it under some other way of doing that. My bulleted list, I essentially did something sort of similar to what Michael did, was I looked at our agendas up to that point for the first half of the year and said, okay, what were the things that we actually did? We had a working group to develop this draft of the ordinance, proposing to replace the wetland. That was the updating the wetland land stewardship activities, essentially just generally providing guidance and oversight to the stewardship coordinator and funding for activities that they were trying to accomplish. And I think the funding piece of it's important to include as an accomplishment. So anything that we've done to fund activities in the town to improve the habitat restoration, that sort of thing, I think is important to highlight, because they give us the resources to do that, and we should be spending them accordingly, and we should show that that's the case. Conditional use permits, that's sort of a listy thing. We do that, it's part of our job, but I think it's important to say, we reviewed 10 or 11 or 8 or 5, whatever they are, provided that input and guidance or recommendations to the planning board. The planning board is the one that makes the ultimate decision on that, but we're advising them, so we provide that feedback and input to them. And then finally, communications. I know we've talked a lot about this, and what are the best mechanisms to sort of reach out to the Durham community? We felt, and I think this maybe is a continuation of 2025, of how do we do a better job of doing that? What are the vehicles we want to use to reach the community? Is it the town newsletter? The types of activities that we're doing with the walks, I think, is a great thing that fits into that education piece of that. We had Alexandra Kosiba come in, gave a seminar this past week, which was very good. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. But I felt, that's also a way that we can provide information to the community about best practices and things that may be of interest to them. But I think, we had a good attendance on the walk, I thought, but the seminar was, we had like maybe 10, 15 people there max, but a lot of them were, people that, already sort of knew some of this stuff, I think. But anyway, it was hard for me because I didn't get a list of everyone who attended.
Oh, okay.
So anyway, those are sort of my observations on how to organize this. But what I'm really looking for here, I think, is just from you guys, What do you see as some of the major accomplishments we've had this year? You know, they don't have to be, 100 of them. Maybe they're 3, 2, whatever that number is, but let's get them out on the table so that we can make sure that they're included in the annual report to the council. That's what I'm getting at, I think.
I get it. So one of the things I don't see in here was, I think we did close on the Pike property and took ownership of the town, and I don't see that noted, but that's significant conservation parcel that was added to our inventory. I would research, and I was just looking
Yep.
to see when we closed. I couldn't find it, but I think
Michael
that's-
would know that,
Yeah.
wouldn't you?
Yeah, I think it was early in 2024, yeah.
So, but that's significant. It added significant protected acreage.
And we should probably have the amount of acreage that's protected too.
Yeah, I'll
Yeah,
send
it's
you
about
some
that.
Okay.
information about that.
The other thing we spent a lot of time on was the water line project through Wagon Hill, that we should reference a lot of the input and work that was done to minimize impact, and that's a key parcel for the town, right? So
I think item 9 on our agenda, the wetland and shoreline overlay district is a real, it's going to have the most impact. And I recognize, while it's not complete, there was a lot of work that was done by members of this board. And speaking on behalf of the planning board, we certainly appreciate that effort.
So Wayne, do you have information on the water lane
It's done.
project?
And it's
What?
working, and they minimized the damage once we pushed them off to the side of the hill.
So is that just more, I wasn't involved much in that, but I guess what I'm asking is, was it really advisory that we went, or, they actually came to us and we said,
No,
this is the best
it
route?
was persuasive.
Persuasive, okay.
When I came back from my leave and found out that Portsmouth intended to put the pipeline down the driveway over the front of the hill with a 10-foot construction road and gravel and all that, I objected, and I think I appeared before this group perhaps. And we had no power because they had a 40-foot right-of-way that goes right through the community garden on the hill. And so enough boards and the town council put pressure on Portsmouth. And I was out there one day, I said, just put it over there and do a break through the stone wall and get it out of sight so it won't destroy half the hill. And that's what they did. And they did a pretty good job now cleaning it up. I'm out there every day, and the new pump is, the new equipment's working. And so it was dicey. When I see engineering flags out, my
Yeah.
alarm goes off.
Well, I'm just curious, is there anything written on what our role was, other than just,
I don't believe so, because we didn't have a lot of clout. It was mostly done between Rich Rainey and the city of Portsmouth. We threatened to go to the mats. I wrote a piece that was published in the Portsmouth Herald about Portsmouth ruining our major asset, the town of Durham. Maybe I should make one comment on planning. When I joined the council 10 years ago, there wasn't a whole lot of direction given. And it's really interesting in an organization like this. It's not like you're all volunteers, and it all came about, this whole process, because we needed to evaluate the administrator's performance. And there was nothing to evaluate him by. And I was used, because I was a college president, used to an anarchical organization where everybody did what they, and so to build some kind of a structure, not only that would guide the committees, but give the council an evaluation of administrator, the only administrator in the state of New Hampshire that has the clout that Todd has. We have a unique law in this town. So the idea is to give enough guidance to give some direction, but yet not make it so specific that committees like this can't determine what is the town needs, because you all know people in town. And that's the trick. So I think exactly what you're doing is right. And I used to call it cascade planning, where you have a central group that kind of comes up with the ideas, and that cascades down through the organization, and they decide. I usually picture it like a tree, and the branches come off of it, kind of thing. So what you suggested as a process is exactly what I think was envisioned. So you're not so constrained that you feel constrained, but yet there is some direction to what the town is doing based on its values, which is what we try to come up with in the beginning.
Okay. Any other thoughts or ideas for accomplishments? Neil?
I have more of a question. So how does this natural resources master plan fit into this discussion? Because this is pretty, even this part, which is only an excerpt, is pretty dense.
Maybe Michael can comment. He was the one who sent it around. I think really more as maybe a resource and background of what the master plan of the town is. I know I think this is what we've looked at a couple times, sort of where does the Conservation Commission activity sort of fit into some of these, and we get a little bit, we move on one of them and we talk about it, and then then we sort of stall out a little bit because all of a sudden we've got 3 or 4 property things we need to look at, and I think the overlay district rewrite is a higher priority at this point than this is, because that is something I think I would really like to try and get through to the planning board in the foreseeable future. Anyway, Michael, did you have any thoughts as to why
the commission's looked at this a few times, and in an ideal world, everything listed in a master plan would be actionable and realistic. And as time and resources allow, the commission would kind of choose its priorities and work through it. However, all master plans, for better or for worse, are very ambitious and have lots of goals and recommendations. And some of them are aspirational. Some of them are things like continue to do this. Some of them would be really difficult to implement because they involve some kind of regional cooperation that we just wouldn't have the resources to do. But the commission has looked at this as time allows, and it is good to be mindful of it, be mindful of our 2015 master plan, which is really an excellent document, and 9 years old, but it's still, I think, very pertinent. But I think that as we have time, I think that are we doing, I'm forgetting whether it's the May meeting when the commission is determining your goals, but I'm actually wondering if we might be better off doing that like in November, because that's, before the new year begins. It's not December, but October, November, the commission might have some energy to think about the upcoming year. I mean, we can make that a regular event, if that would make sense.
I think it does. Unfortunately, it's November now. So to do it this year, it probably would not work. And so if we were going to try and get maybe we look at this in January or February and try and do something like that. The other thought I had is, do you think it would be useful, as I'm summarizing the accomplishments, to actually look at the master plan and see if any of those sort of fulfill any of the master plan, I won't call them goals, but sort of things that are identified in there, and just draw sort of a line to say, oh yeah, and by the way, this also helps meet the master plan item, blah, 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 as well as the goal for the town.
I think that's worth doing. I wouldn't, burden yourself with it, but I think where you can point to specific things.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm thinking. Because my first thought, I thought, well, the easy way out would be just to put my name up here and say 2024 and hand this back in. But I didn't think that would work very well, so. But I like the organizational way that he did this, and I think that I will try and stick to that.
Yeah, I like the idea of paying closer attention to the master plan. I will just say that, yes, we have done that before, and so I think it will require some careful thought about how we're going to facilitate that conversation so we don't just end up kind of in the middle of this document over and over again. So I don't know if that's something, I'm happy to chat with you, Dwight, and
Okay.
Michael outside of the meeting to maybe come up with a strategy for how to utilize the master plan in
Yeah.
our conversations better.
Okay. No, I think that's a good idea. So that's why it's here. So
Yeah.
did I answer your question? Who asked the question? You?
That would be
Okay.
me.
All right.
But I do notice one thing is that, just in taking a quick look here, on page 15 of this master plan, it talks about climate change and sea level rise, which is one of the things that we did address when we, went through the wetland and shoreland overlay district and changing the buffers according, to the buffer options for the bay document. So
Yeah.
just kind of a quick one that you can slot in there.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. That's the type of thing I'm thinking of. I mean, I'm not trying to make, anything really cumbersome or long here, but I think trying to tie it back into things that the town has identified as priorities, either through the master plan or the goals statements that they're coming out, the town council's coming out with every year, I think would be really helpful, at least from my bureaucratic mind. Having worked in a bureaucracy for 30 years, I think that's why I'm sort of thinking about it this way. Any other priorities?
Well, just a quick comment, you do have the goals for 24 here, the 3 bullets, and you could just, each one of them, you've acted on.
Yep.
So that gives you a nice format. And then plus, not only did you work on these 3 bullets, but these are the other activities.
Yeah, no, that's right.
I
Yeah.
think that would be, that would be remarkable, because I've listened to all the reports, and that would be probably an excellent report, where you had goals, you worked on them, and then you had your own, and you worked on them, and that would be, I think, very valuable information.
Okay.
Most of the presentations, some get, depending on what we have on our agenda, don't get a lot of time, but some do, and I think people will be very interested. I mean, the issue we're facing right now is the issue of conservation versus workforce housing. And how do we balance those two seemingly conflicting goals? And it all centers around, as Michael knows, on property on Route 4. So I'm on the Conservation Committee watching conservation, on the Town Council promoting workforce housing. And the two sometimes are in conflict with each other.
Well, they definitely are. They definitely are, because it was interesting when, little aside on the presentation that Alexandra gave, I mean, she talked about carbon sequestration and how really the best thing that you can do is keep it in standing stock as much as possible. But the pressures in the seacoast are such, in my mind, that tax rates are going up. People don't like that. Property tax is the only way we pay for services.
Pressure.
Yeah. It's a challenge.
It is, and we haven't reached the conclusion.
Yeah, and I don't think there is an easy solution to that.
I have a resolution, but no one will do it. you consider the whole of Stratford County as one, like you were one town, and then you just select which pieces of that much larger area would be best placed to put workforce housing and which places are better to conserve. But I'm on the Stratford Regional Planning Commission, but they do it town by town, not as a region. And so that's why the town of Durham was given goals for workforce housing, as every other town was, based on its performance, as opposed to the whole region and where the workforce housing might go. It should be in Rochester, or it should be in Gonick, or wherever. I just resigned from the Stratford Regional Plan because I'm going to be in the legislature starting next Wednesday, where that'll be an issue for sure there. But I think having a conservation commission to weigh in, well, one of the points we're talked about is whether 60% of the new overlay should be in conservation or not. That's, the developer would like it to be less. And how do you make, so that's the issue we're wrestling with, I think, Michael, am I right? Or,
Ann, we're a little over.
I'm getting off chart, so.
Well, that's all right,
I
but
guess
I'd
I'd-
like to hear what you have to say.
I had a question about the agenda item, which maybe this was not intended, but goals for 2025 was listed on the agenda. And that being next year, I'm wondering if we would want to have a discussion about goals and whether, whether getting more involved, having the Concom get more involved with the workforce housing. We had that nice presentation from Salary Tobias with the generalities,
Yep.
but, we haven't really engaged with the specifics yet. If that would be a goal, or diving more into the master plan, or thinking about updating the natural resources inventory and the maps that might help us make conservation decisions going forward. Ellen Snyder had the idea of doing some vernal pool mapping. Maybe we want to think about sort of building out some of those mapping resources that might help us make future plans. I think there are some, in addition to finishing up the great work that we did in 2024, thinking ahead to 2025. I was wondering the group's thoughts on that, and whether that was a discussion that you wanted to have before we sort of moved on from this agenda item.
Well, I didn't want to have the goals discussion today, because I think would take up another half an hour, if not more. But I think it's definitely something we should either get on the December or January agendas to talk about.
I'm
and
wondering
then move it.
the workforce housing thing in particular. I don't know the timeline of that, but I'm almost wondering if we want to put that to a goals discussion and then engage, or if we
Yeah.
want to,
Well,
I don't know, bringing that up to this group.
Yeah. I don't think we've certainly thought about it as a priority and then have the conversation. It was more like this was something organic happening through the town. They came to us for our input and thoughts, if you will. And if we see it as a commission, as a priority going forward, as to what are some of the conservation issues that we really want to make sure that this initiative, that people understand, we could do that. It's within our purview to do that. So yeah, that could be part of the goals 2025 discussion. So, any other quick thoughts on that? Okay.
But you could have a looking ahead piece of your report too, as to the issues that
That's a good point.
Conservation Commission sees they'll be facing in the next year. And I think clearly that's one of them. When we're reducing the size, we're increasing the density of the non-conservation piece of the land, right, Michael? I think essentially through the workforce overlay.
Well, it's facilitating development of one or more parcels that are now vacant.
Well, the developer, I asked him specifically how he made money on these deals, and he said because of the density, we're able to put in the 40% that's not conserved, right? That's what he said. And that, my bills went off. Well, how dense is it? What is it now in the workforce? It's
Well, the proposal is pretty dense. It's 4,200 square feet per unit for the gross parcel, which is slightly over 10 units per acre. And the way it's calculated, the density is you would take any given parcel, whether it's 5 acres or 50 acres, and everything in the gross parcel size counts toward the density except wetlands and open water. So you subtract that, and then you divide the total square footage by 4,200, and it could be a pretty large number. But there are certainly constraints for developing any parcels. The big one is that 60% of the gross parcel size would need to be permanent open space. So whatever your development is, X number of units, parking, driveways, some of the utilities, some of those could be in open space, would have to be confined within 40% of the parcel. And the reason that there's a high density for affordable housing or workforce housing is very hard to do. There's not a lot of developers that do it, and it's difficult to make the numbers work. The idea is that I'm quoting James Bubar, Councilor James Bubar has a funny comment joke that he makes. Well, we lose money on every unit, but we make it up on volume. That's not what we do. But the idea is that with workforce housing, if you're very, very careful with your design and your planning, that you can, obviously you have to make a profit on every unit, but your profit's small. And so by having more density, overall, you're making a reasonable profit.
All right,
But
well,
we're also, and this is important, we're looking to allow the flexibility of the owner or the agency running that to have flexibility with how they set rent prices, so that ultimately it had to be targeted to a certain percentage of the average median income for our area. But it would give them the flexibility to charge more to some and less to others.
well, he was the developer who was on the hot seat. I won't say hot seat. He was open, and his wife. They work. They go by the average income, so you can have some higher rents and then some lower rents.
I'm sorry, isn't that what I said?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
did.
Okay.
But what struck me was that why, I asked him specifically, why should someone go with workforce housing instead of building 6 McMansions? And he said he can make a lot more money, valuable, the more units you have, the more tenants you have, the cash flow and so forth. And I'm still thinking, what does this do to the land? You know, what does this do to the 117 acres that they're looking at off Route 4 that has wetlands on it and so forth? And I'm working with the owner. How do you do that? Now, if you drive up Back River Road and look at the development up there, that's dense. That's really dense. Single-family houses.
Like 13 acres and 40 units. And that's just a very rough recollection. And that's a tiny house development.
I think my point is, I think the Conservation Commission should take a look at that. From the point of view of long-term conservation and what concerns you might have, given how hard you work at making sure conservation happens everywhere else, what about this use of a large parcel of land for workforce housing that in the long run, you can say doesn't conserve land. I'm wrong, Michael? I think there's a role for this commission to play in planning for that.
well, I definitely think there's a role for us. It's advisory, certainly. And we can certainly look at that and provide input to the town as to what they're doing. They'd already sort of reached out to us a little bit when they're developing their zoning ordinances right now on that. And I was glad to see in that they have these protections, like 60% of the area that's being developed needs to be put into open space conservation.
The normal conservation subdivision is,
Percent of open space depends upon the parcel because it's based upon a calculation of the unusable area, shallow to high water, shallow to bedrock, steep slopes, poorly drained open space. So this would be 60%, and which is pretty aggressive. And I think that's part of the reason why the Housing Task Force and the Planning Board decided on 60%, because if we're going to have high density, that can be compensated by having a significant amount of the parcel permanently protected.
I think I'm probably more sensitive to this because I was in the group that worked to buy Wagon Hill Farm. And people forget that was all subdivided into 100 by 100 lots. That was going to be a Charlie White development. That was going to be a Wedgwood. When we finally convinced the owner to sell it to the town, and I think he had less money, and it's scary how close we came. We only won that vote by, I think, 13 votes because you needed a 2/3 vote because it was a bond. And there was a school edition on the docket that day for a town meeting. And we got enough people to come and vote, but it scared me. Picture Wagon Hill now with 100 houses on it instead of what it's become. And that's what I'm concerned about with the workforce housing. And I've said it in public. I'm not saying anything new because I queried the developer. They're just doing what you'd expect them to do. The owner's trying to maximize the revenue. He's the right to do that. We all would do that. The workforce housing wants enough density to generate the rents to make it really valuable, and provide housing. I give them credit. They've done these. They've already done one in town, right? But I think the conservation perspective should be heard.
Okay, well, I think we can have this discussion as we go into the next year. It sounds to me like as we have the goals conversation for 2025 for the commission, that this is definitely something that should be in the mix for what we think and talk about. But I think that's something we can deal with maybe next meeting or the meeting after, as far as figuring out how we're going to do that. I just wanted to close this session out by saying, so the next steps will be for me to take your input here, write it up into an annual report. But I think it might be good to have someone actually else read it after I write it.
Do you have what?
Have someone read it after I write it to make sure that I haven't got any grammar things or mischaracterized anything that we've talked about.
Well, I'll work with you for sure, but
Okay.
if you want to share it with anyone,
Did
or if
anyone
the
else
commission
on
wants to
the
see it.
commission?
I'm happy to look at it. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Yeah, so my goal is to have that done by Sunday after Thanksgiving and get it to you, because I think it's due the first Friday of November. She said Friday, November 8th, but Friday's actually November 6th,
Somewhere.
or December 6th.
Yeah.
I'm still in November for some reason.
Yeah, send me a draft and
Okay.
we'll work on it together.
All right. So with that, let's move on to the meat of the conversation tonight, which is going to be the Wetland and Shoreland Overlay District zoning amendment. You want to take that away, Neil?
Yes, thank you. Dwight?
Does everyone have a hard copy to see? Does anyone need a hard, have just one last hard copy? I think everyone has one, but Steve may not. Steve, you want to?
What are you looking for?
Oh, yeah.
Do you have your own copy?
Yeah, I think everyone should have a hard copy in front of them, yeah.
Okay, yeah, I think everybody does. So, at our last meeting, and thank you, Michael, for typing up the notes on this and getting it updated, we got up to page 9. However, the process that we used the last time was to go back and take a look at anything which has not been nailed down. So basically to tie up the loose ends on everything preceding, and then to pick up on page 9 again. So does everybody agree that that would be a good thing to do, to tie up loose ends and then to move on? If anybody objects, please speak up. No? Okay. So our first loose end is on page 1, so where Michael has very clearly delineated the additions in blue, or the proposed additions from our last meeting in blue, new additions that Michael recommends, and then comments. So the first thing that we have in blue, which is what we talked about at the October 23rd meeting, is on page 1 under invasive plants, to change the reference from the Extension Service and HDES or the Native Plant Trust to the New Hampshire Division of Environmental Services and the New Hampshire Department of Agriculture, Markets, and Food. So I don't exactly remember where that came from, but
Well,
that's what we talked about.
that was from our meeting in September, and I don't believe you or Dwight were there when we discussed that. I guess I would like to maybe amend, this seems like it's going to take a very long time if we're going to go through every single change that in blue or purple up until page 9. I don't know, maybe not, but. And
What do you think's a better way to-
re-agree on each one? It just seems like if you've already discussed this and made agreements, are there any things that may, any objections to the, to the things that have already been discussed, or questions? Maybe we should do that instead of just going through each one by one. Because I just think that'll take us a long time, and we'll be like revisiting things that you already discussed.
Do you have any objections to that? Is there?
I just want to make sure that we don't leave anything hanging, no hanging chads in there. So
Right.
if everybody agrees to Erin's proposal, how should we do it, Erin? Should we just have everybody take 5 minutes and
Yeah, I would
and
say
look through it?
let's everybody take 5 minutes, look over quite a while to rediscuss things that have already been discussed.
And that's only up to the top of page 9, because we haven't gotten any further than that.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so we'll have 5 minutes of silence and everybody look through. Okay, let's give that a try, see how that works. Is everybody ready? Put your pencils down. Okay. How about if we just go through page by page, and if anybody has any comment on what is in colored ink on that page, then we'll talk about it. And if there's no comment, then page 1, anybody have any comment? Objection?
Do we have to table that one until we have our plant species and site plan regulations conversation? When that one, when that comes back into the agenda?
I think,
Or are those two things separate enough that?
Oh,
Yeah.
it's separate, yeah.
Okay, are we good on page 1? Going once, going twice? Okay. Nothing on page 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, we're doing good. And then on page 6, we have some more proposed additions that came about as a result of the discussion that we had on forestry the last time. So what we decided to do was to reference everything to number 13. And Michael, if I'm saying anything out of...
Yeah, so on number 8, my comments, you see my comments in purple.
Yeah,
The committee said dead trees shall remain and not be cut, and which I think, as I look at that more, and I've heard from some other people, including the tree warden, Rich Rain, we're going to have a problem with that. Unless the dead trees are unless they have a lot of woods and the trees are way off in the woods.
But it's standard. It's standard in Maine, for example.
This is our ordinance. We're requiring, and this ordinance is oriented toward wetlands and shorelands. So everything in here should be oriented toward protecting the wetlands and the shorelands. We should be very wary of sort of adding up and throwing in other things unless they're really justified. And I'm a planner. This is all cost
can I interrupt
benefit.
you for a second?
Yeah.
But we're just talking about what's in the buffer right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
In item 8.
Okay.
Right, so that would be in the buffer. But I'm a planner and I'm trained to think in terms of cost benefit and be pragmatic. And we want to pick our battles. I think that it's okay as long as there's X distance from a house. The question is really what that distance should be. The way this was originally worded is any dead tree shall remain. Now, of course, if they're hazard, they could be removed. But I think that people's home is sacrosanct, and we have to have a reasonable distance from a house where we are not saying you must leave dead trees whether they're standing or fallen.
And is that where the 100 feet comes in?
That's what makes sense to me.
But the fire marshal, and looking at your at the exchange of emails, didn't say 100 feet, right? He said
That's for
he said
fire
50
safety.
Okay, so you're making a distinction between fire safety and what you think is fair to the homeowner.
Right.
And the fire marshal was talking about fallen trees and debris, right? Not standing dead trees.
Well, I
Was
think
my
he's
understanding.
thinking in terms of fallen trees that could be a fire hazard.
Yeah, my understanding this is the danger of listening to a forester and then pretending that you are one after you've heard one lecture, was that standing dead trees are not as much of a fire hazard as they are on the ground, because apparently they burn from the outside in, and it's less likely that they will go into a conflagration. I'll look at Nick as to what
I
you're...
will not pretend to be a fire expert.
Okay. That was my understanding from their thing. And now I understand exactly where you're coming from. I would also think that as we think about climate change, fire is a much higher probability event. We just have gone through and are still in a bit of a drought. So I can definitely see keeping an area around the house as clear as possible of dead things on the ground, as well as, There's also the aesthetic of having a dead tree standing in your front yard, you know? So I'm not opposed to, from my perspective, increasing that out to 100 feet. But I definitely think, being a property owner that owns 6.5 acre lot, I would not want to go out into my woods and have to cut down every dead tree that's out there, because I don't see that that is a benefit to either the habitat or the animals that rely on those things. So,
Well, right now, we don't require dead trees at all to be, property owner can remove any dead trees within the overlay district. So this was an additional thing proposed by the committee.
Okay, so are we now talking about,
so I'm just trying to, so is the proposal on the table that we leave in the purple addition to number 8?
that's the proposal,
Okay.
yes. That's
Well, that's what I
That's
would
what Mike was
propose, which would be
recommending.
stricter than the current ordinance, which does not, you can remove any dead trees, standing or fallen, but it would be looser than what the committee
Yeah.
came up with.
The last clause in that first paragraph on page 7, I feel like there's a conservation discussion to be had here about, all right, we'll read it. Dead trees, whether standing or fallen, shall remain and not be cut, except for trees that are a threat to persons or property, and trees located within 100 feet of a house or other principal building. So, in theory, that allows for a property owner who's fairly close to their house is fairly close to the water, to take a whole bunch of dead trees that are already down on the ground near the water out. Because it's, you know, if it was within 100 feet. But the ecological value of downed wood near especially on a slope or something, near a water body is, removing that would degrade the site's ability to slow water entering the water body. It may just be as you know, a matter of rewriting this to say something like, yes, dead trees standing can be cut within 100 feet, and anything that's a hazard can be removed. But the way that it's written is it's too much of a blanket statement that would allow somebody to just kind of take all dead stuff away from their house near the shoreline if they so chose.
So you're suggesting that the fallen,
The hazard thing is the
part.
important part. Like, obviously, we would not want, like Mike said, homes are sacrosanct. Anything that would be a hazard should be within the landowner's right to remove the hazard by getting on the ground or whatever. However, it's the removal of dead trees that are already on the ground that I would suggest keeping it on site, you know, if it's not a hazard.
and that is to prevent excess runoff into the water.
That's
body.
one reason, yeah, sure.
Erosion.
One of the reasons for the buffer is habitat as well, and so lots of stuff uses the dead wood on the ground. And so if, you know, we're providing a habitat corridor along the banks of the Oyster River, say.
What if dead trees within X number of feet of the water? You cannot remove a fallen dead tree within X feet of the water. That would trump the house.
Yeah.
Whether that's 25 feet or
Right.
whatever.
It's a matter of how we would like to, you know, it's more kind of hemming and hawing on distances and things, what would make sense. But just how can we structure that last clause there to ensure that homeowners have the right to protect their home from things that might fall on them, but
Well, you sort of have this contradiction built in here, which trumps which is, we're saying that danger to the people in the house trumps environmental protection in some ways. Because, and this is true for fire suppression, because the fire marshal says 50 feet around the house, that should be clear of everything that's dead and dying. And I don't know of any house that's within 50 feet of the shoreline, but if they are,
That might be a nice house.
then they would have, because the fire thing trumps the environmental protection, the ability to go out and clear that out. And it sort of makes sense that that would be the case. But I totally get what you're talking about as far as environmental protection goes.
Do you think,
So-
do you think we need the and trees located within 100 feet? If we're saying if they are a threat to persons or property,
Oh, well, it's actually a separate thing. I mean, threat of falling trees trumps everything. That's personal safety. But I'm thinking of something different, that if 30, 40 feet from your house, you have standing dead trees, people don't expect to keep them. Let's assume they're not a threat, but they're just, dead trees in the woods behind my house. Don't most people, I think, would have a hard time if we say, well, you have to keep. It's different, the down trees and the standing trees. But if we say that it's standing trees, if we say trees that are close to your house, they're not a physical threat, but they're habitat, you cannot remove them.
Yes, I would say yes to that.
yeah.
But then the question is, what's that distance near the house? Is it 50 feet? Is it 100 feet?
You know,
Is
a
it
forester's
75?
hat on here would just say within striking distance of the hat, and of the, not of the hat, of the house. And so, trees vary in height, obviously. Your landscape oak tree might only be 35 feet tall, but a pine tree off in the woods might be 110 feet tall.
Yeah.
And so, it could be that an assessment in certain circumstances is warranted to determine whether that's really a hazard or whether it's just unsightly.
So correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, but my understanding that if we write it into the ordinance and it's approved, they can still come to us to get a variance, correct? And I know that you have some issues with how small a thing is that comes.
Well, we
Like
do
if they-
have, yes, we have some good things built in here, I think.
Yeah.
Under permitted use B, the bottom of page 10, number 11, is an out for anything. And permitted use B is not real burdensome. It's usually one visit to the, but we still, people still, it has to be, reasonableness is the bottom line, whatever that is. So, I'm not talking about something that's a threat. I'm saying assume a tree that is not a threat. It's, it's beyond the fall zone to the house, but it's clearly dead. But the thing is, if it's dead, it's probably also blighted, isn't it?
Not necessarily.
Well, it could be like a
It
woodpecker
could have been
tree.
struck by lightning, a variety.
Richard?
So we're focusing on the house, but, I used to live out deep in the woods, and I was concerned about the power lines as well, because that I would view that as a threat to property. It may not be owned by me, but it's infrastructure that's critical for me to use my house.
And so that would be covered in the first line, trees that are a threat to persons or property.
All right, just so we all understand that property is extended to,
Should we, can
Utility
we
as well.
simply rewrite that last purple clause here to remove?
why don't we leave it
It's the
that way?
trees
right?
in
So
the
we-
second-
That's what I'm saying, if we just
So
remove
Michael, are
that
you
last
thinking about
part.
just aesthetically, like people who don't want to be staring out their window at a dead tree and they
Well,
want
Dwight and I went to look at Linda Rhodes' property on Durham Point Road on Friday. And she coordinated with Rich Rain, the tree warden, and she has coordinated with New Hampshire UNH Extension with a forester and a wildlife specialist. And she has lots of red pine that is dead. I guess it's blighted, but it's dead. And everybody agreed that's appropriate to remove that, and the ordinance allows it. And that's not a threat to property. a distance from her house.
But it was an environmental threat because of if it all fell down, invasive species could get in there and just take off.
Well, that's another thing. So
Well,
we don't mention that here.
yeah, but that's because it's an area with 75 really tall trees, and if they all go helter-skelter, you can't get them out. Whereas if one falls down, in fact, Nick talked about
Those
this
of us,
when we were
those of
at
us on the
Farm.
Doe Farm walk on
Yeah.
last Wednesday.
Learned about that.
Yeah.
Which is
Discussed
where they
this
went
area.
in, they selectively cut all the dead red pines out so they wouldn't have that problem. So that's, that makes perfect sense to me. But I think, a single tree, I get what you're talking about. I guess whether we need a distance piece in here that says, well, if you're within 100 feet of the house, go ahead, take it down. Except maybe a clause about if you're too close to the water, I don't know. It gets very, very complicated rapidly, which is why maybe, Nick's suggestion is we take that out, and then if someone wants to remove something and they're uncertain, they should come
It comes
to us.
permitted use.
Well, I think
become
there needs to
permitted
be
use.
some minimal distance from the house. But I think there needs to be some distance that they don't have to do that. And this is also, very frankly, I'm extremely busy. I have so many boards, so much that I'm dealing with. And whenever anybody wants to cut trees, we have to make plans for Rich, Rain, and I to visit.
Right.
And I really, it's just, I mean, no matter how hard I work, we cannot handle lots more applications to the Conservation Commission and the Planning Board for relatively small things like cutting a few trees. I just don't have the capacity time-wise unless I'm not going to get an assistant, and that's not justified. But, when new ordinances are looked at in New Hampshire, in Concord, they call them a fiscal note. And if it's going to impact town resources, we need to be mindful of that. So I just think that if Rich, Rain, and I are visiting a homeowner and they have 6 dead trees that are not a threat, but they're 35, 40, 50 feet away, and they want to take them down, and we say you cannot, but you can come to the Conservation Commission and the Planning Board, I don't think it'll be well received, and I think it's just creating a lot more work for everybody without a lot of benefit.
Well, is there any reason why we couldn't adopt the fire marshal's standard of 50 feet?
Well, I think 50. I think that's probably 50. It's probably reasonable. 50 feet is. Yeah, that's probably reasonable.
I think it's a tree length. I've had, 100-foot pines, fall, and my rule is only safe tree is a tree length away from the house. For things like pines. I have oaks that are closer, but, you really can't quantify that. It's on a case-by-case basis.
Though anything, if you're writing kind of a blanket envelope around your house, anything that's beyond that would still be within striking distance would be considered, a candidate for removal anyway, based on the language written.
Yeah.
So I think if we want to kind of meet Michael in his place of being overwhelmed by applications and these things.
It would be, but any down trees within
Yeah.
25 feet of the reference line cannot be removed. You'd have to come to the commission for that. So anything that's a threat, but you could also remove any dead trees standing or fallen within 50 feet of a house. However,
As long as that's not
if
within
the fallen,
25 feet of it.
any fallen tree within 25 feet may not be removed. I can write it in a way so it's clear. If that seems to make sense.
Can I ask a naive question from a business major? Why would you not take down a dead tree and replant it with a live tree? We're going to take a whole bunch of dead trees down right on the Oyster River as part of the shoreline restoration, and as far as I know, they're leaving. That's what the construction road is for. there's 100 trees coming down. They have ribbons on them, and some of them are dead. Is it habitat? I mean, there are some really nice, there's a huge tree up there, I call it the squirrel condo, that's completely rotten, but it's full of animals.
Well, my
Is that
understanding,
why we leave them
well,
standing?
my understanding from their presentation is that they're taking those trees down because if they fall, they become an erosional.
Oh, yeah, and there's plenty that have
Because-
already fallen and are in the
Yeah,
river now.
so that-
And they're gonna take them out.
Because, yeah, but what I'm getting at is that it would compromise the edge of the land where it comes to the river. And then therefore, that's a good justification for taking those out.
The reason they're taking them down is that it's not the tree itself, it's the boughs that are
Shade.
blocking the
Shade
sun
of
from
it.
hitting the ground so the
Oh,
grass
yes,
can grow
that-
and anchor the banking.
Yeah.
We had 40 80-footers go down on my lot in Madbury Road in 78, was it the hurricane? I didn't leave any of them on the ground, we sold the lumber.
Well, I guess
Need
the
it.
one thing that when we were thinking about this, when we originally wrote it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Neil, but it was to prevent this, homeowners that have a potential view out onto a river or a bay from going out and just clear cutting
Yeah.
stuff. And there is a habitat value to dead trees, either standing upright or on the ground, because they provide, roosting areas, they provide, food for fungi and all sorts of other things. So that's why, we don't want to necessarily see them removed unless they are really a threat to life and limb and property.
Okay,
That
Thank
was
you.
our thinking on it.
I understand.
I guess given that one of the goals of this is to protect wildlife habitat, and we're really concerned about the shoreline, I'm wondering whether we want this 25-foot restriction to only be for fallen trees, or if we want it to be standing as well, really right down by the shoreline, if that's where the corridor is going to be. So I guess,
Yeah. Well, I guess, Michael, your charge is to rewrite this if you can to, include the 50 feet. You mentioned the exception for the reference line and whether we need any other language in there related to,
Well, no, I know what you're saying, but I'm thinking of cases recently where, like Rich and I have visited people's property along the water, and there were dead trees, like on a slope, and we okayed them cutting it, they have to leave the stump. Some of that actually could be actually that could be erosional, because if you have a slope and you have a dead tree and you're leaving the tree, it's going to fall into the water. Whereas if they can cut it, then the stump is going to remain so I think on the one hand it does make sense, but if you have like a slope, then you could cause more of a problem.
Are there state rules? 'Cause I recall when Colleen first was on she was looking to cut trees that had fallen into the Lamprey River because they were impeding navigation of the rowing, and was told that she couldn't do it.
Well, I think
Remember
that can
that?
happen.
Yeah.
Well, that's right. If once they get established, it may be a problem, and I can appreciate that for Colleen and her business, that might have been frustrating.
well,
I just
trees
recall
in
that
the
there
water
was-
also provide habitat for
Yeah.
Fish.
for fish and crustaceans and, fish food, whatever. So it's not like it's necessarily bad if it happens. It's really more of what are the issues with erosion, undercutting of the bank, all that sort of thing, plus this, this human tendency to go out and cut something down so I can get a nice view. I don't think it's necessarily always a bad thing, but at the same time, it's not really what we're looking for from a conservation standpoint.
Although, I mean, if it is along, say it's along the Oyster River, and you do have a slope, and you do have, say, 3 dead trees like this, if you don't remove them, then they're gonna fall, they're gonna be in the water next to someone's dock. Maybe they threaten the dock, but, you know, but they're gonna be in the water, and they're gonna yank out the slope, really cause erosion, be in the water, make them hard to remove. I would not want to tell a homeowner on the Oyster River, if your tree is now in the water or falls in the water, you cannot remove it.
Well, I'm not suggesting that, I'm just saying that there is a reason why trees in the water. It's not like it's necessarily a bad thing to have a tree in the water. But I understand we have the exception in here, that if it's gonna threaten people or property and dock is property, then you can take it out.
Yeah,
Michael, have we added enough constraints with our suggestions here that it would kind of ease the burden of?
yeah, I'm responding to Ann's comment about the standing trees. I understand how that can, in some cases, that can be better for stabilizing, but then in other cases, it can be a big problem. I would rather limit it just to fallen trees within the 25 feet, rather than, because there were cases, the 2 cases recently where we visited somebody on the Oyster River, and they had dead trees, and they were like this on a slope. I would not have wanted to say to them, you can't remove them. Because it's going to fall, it's going to be in the water, and be much more difficult for me to remove. It's going to tear up the slope.
What if the tree that is cut down is replaced by new planting?
You know, it's a good idea, but enforcing that is,
Difficult to do.
you know, enforcing that is very difficult.
Because that is one thing that they're gonna do when they take those red pines out, is they are talking about going down in there and planting smaller trees, as well as going in and making sure that all the,
She's a very diligent and knowledgeable homeowner.
yeah, she is,
We're
very much so.
fortunate.
I want to bring up one more potential complication, is that so far the discussion about trees fallen or trees standing, we've been talking about bodies of water, you know, such as on the river or the shoreline, but this ordinance is also about, you know, wetlands as well. So, you know, what makes sense for, you know, along the shore of a river or the bay may not make sense for, you know, like a bog or a vernal pool or, you know, the other types of wetlands that this ordinance applies to. So, not to overcomplicate it, but I think if we're going to put something in that's a constraint or restriction, we need to make sure that it makes sense for both wetland and shoreland. Or we could have an A and a B, you know, this applies to the shoreland, this applies to the wetland. So I don't have an answer for that other than to say that we have to be comprehensive about what we decide.
No, I think to allow a standing tree next to a wetland probably makes more sense. I'm not sure how complicated we want to make this, though.
No, but I do think we ought to make it so, you know, it's applicable to everything that the ordinance is supposed to be, you know, addressing.
Right.
So,
So,
I don't know how to word that. I have no
I'm
idea.
gonna suggest that, Michael, do you have enough information, you think, to rewrite this?
Yeah, but the question is, you know, we could say if it's a standing tree within 25 feet of a wetland, then you have to preserve it. But you don't have to if it's next to a shoreland. Maybe that's clear because we separate them under applicability. It does get complicated. This is one of the disadvantages of combining the two, but
Yeah.
that's not a stream or a pond. Then you have to also keep standing trees within 25 feet. I mean, we could do that. Does that make sense?
Can you repeat that, please?
So So dead trees, I'll make this more clear, but dead trees, whether standing or fallen, shall remain and not be cut, except for trees that are a threat to persons or property, and trees located within 50 feet of a house. However, in the latter case, if the 50 feet from a house is within 25 feet of the reference line, fallen trees cannot be removed. And I'll write that in a way that's clear. I can make that clear. So we might also say, and if it's in 25 feet of a wetland that's not a shoreland, it also, standing trees must remain? Or are we getting too complicated, or?
And this is going to make your job easier?
Well, that's the, yeah, it's,
Well, at least it would be, from my perspective, from a conservation perspective, it would be a lot clearer.
if what?
As to what we're trying to protect from using this ordinance.
I mean, you're saying if we require a standing tree within 25 feet of a wetland to remain?
Yeah.
Okay.
But,
But then,
you know,
it was
you can-
also balancing the thing not being like too crazy complicated.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. And, you know, the downside to this, the approach you're suggesting also is that you could always think of an exception, you know, well, what I think a little generality is useful. So,
So would that include a vernal pool?
yeah, that's my point. Exactly.
That's why I'd sort of rather make it just fallen trees, you know, within 25 feet, because
Yeah.
it starts to just, there's so many permutations.
How big of an issue is this? Do we have people hauling out fallen, dead timber all over the place adjacent to resources?
Well, it was interesting, this thing with the red pine was, you know, they obviously have a very large property. But it was definitely going to be a hazard, and, you know, from a ecological perspective, if all those trees fell down,
Then
they had-
maybe that's what needs to be added to. I mean, we talk about a threat, but we don't talk about the ecological threat.
Yeah, threat to person's property or the
Ecological.
Oh, we do say, but if it's blighted, if it's diseased or blighted, it can be removed.
Yeah, the thing with using the
Or
term
invasive.
ecological value is that, you know, we do define it to some degree, but
Okay.
that's a pretty ambiguous term too. But I get where you're going with that.
So it can be an issue, or
Yeah.
is that the only issue, Dwight, that you're aware of? We had this one stand of red pines, and that's what we can point to.
Well, it's not just a red pine. I mean, it could be any gap that's created by something that's taken out, allows the sun to hit the ground.
No, I'm going back to, is this an issue? Are we addressing an issue that's occurring in our town? And that people are cutting and either cutting dead trees or removing dead fallen trees that are in the buffer?
I can't answer that question. I don't know that it's necessarily a huge issue per se. I think this was really more of a, how do we cover all of our bases in the rewrite to, you know,
Yeah, I hear you. So do you know if it's an issue?
Well, from the phone calls that we get from responsible landowners along the water, I don't hear from people that are near a wetland. It's people on the Oyster River, or a tidal tributary. They'll contact me and Rich, and we'll go look at it. And they're usually pretty responsible, and Rich is a forester. We walk around, and, you know, the trees that are dead, they can remove, got to leave the stump. So, I mean, it's worked well for that, but I don't know how many people are illegally cutting things. I don't get a lot of complaints. And I don't hear from people next to wetlands. It's people on really the Oyster River or Little Bay.
So if we did add a vague clause, persons or property threat to person's property or the ecological integrity of a site, wouldn't that also include the instance that you've been talking about, Michael, which is a tree that's on the slope of a bank on the Oyster River, that if it were to fall down, having not been cut, it would cause all kinds of erosion and things like that? Like, wouldn't that maybe encompass a lot of these different kinds of scenarios that we've been talking about? And perhaps,
Well, I kind of like that, but then, or trees, where if they are not removed could impair the ecological integrity of a site, but that could be wide open. You're trusting your tree warden to use his judgment,
Yeah.
but
I don't
it's
see
not a
why.
bad thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of like that,
Yeah.
if you're comfortable with that.
and then that would include the things like, if it's a down tree near the water versus a
And then we
standing
could
tree near
say,
the water versus.
and then we could say the 25 feet either standing or fallen.
Yeah.
I think that's good if you're comfortable with that.
I guess I'm wondering how many trees are within 25 to 50 feet from a house and are not a threat to that house?
Yeah.
So like are falling into this really complicated window.
I've
You
seen
know?
some, they'll
I-
have a smallish birch, 30 feet away. It's not a threat, but it's dead,
Okay.
But I think if we include that, but no dead tree, fallen or standing within 25 feet may be removed. But we also include trees that, I have to figure out how to word it, for the ecological, that should be removed to preserve the ecological integrity of the site,
Yeah.
something like that. I think that's good. Yeah.
That's a good.
You just said 25 feet. I thought we had said 50 feet.
Oh, well, 50 feet from the house, but if it's 25 feet from the reference line,
Okay.
then you have to leave it.
I see.
And that would be standing or fallen.
So what trumps what? Does 50 feet from the house have higher priority than the 25 feet from the reference
The
line?
25 feet from the reference line would trump the house.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, any other comments on that particular item? No?
You'll have a chance to look at this again at the next meeting and see what you think.
Okay, so that will be in purple next time.
That'll be in blue next time.
Oh, in blue, okay. Okay, so now, the other thing on page 7 was number 13 in blue, and everybody okay with that one? That's one of the ones that we were looking at. Okay. Moving on to page 8. Okay, so there's two that are in green that are comments that I would like to just bring those up for discussion, so if there's no discussion, we can just get rid of them. So the first one at the top, Sarah questioned how to interpret this provision and whether this is measurable and actionable. So since Sarah is no longer with us, do we even care what Sarah had to say? That's a joke. Aaron, do you have any comments on that one?
I mean, I remember the conversation that we had, because I think this was at the September meeting. I mean, I agree with what she's saying, but I think there are plenty of other things in the ordinance that, how are we going to actually measure whether or not this is happening? I think we could say that about almost about a lot of things.
When
So-
you have words like minor and inconsequential, how do you
Yeah,
quantify
or
them?
I think, she was talking about specifically, how are we monitoring whether or not landowners are using best management practices in their agricultural activity? And, I think that's true for, obviously, responsible landowners are going to be the ones to call and say, am I allowed to cut down the trees? And there will be some landowners that do not call and will cut down the trees without calling. So I feel like I agree, but I also think that if we're going to hold this particular thing to whether or not we can enforce it or it's actionable, then there are going to be a lot of other things in here. So, yeah.
And say, no, this is going to be minor, this is going to be a major impact. And that
Sure.
gives the town the ability to intercede if something's brought to their attention. Whether or not we have in our own minds, how are they going to measure that?
Exactly.
That's how I sort of interpret what we have here.
Okay, so you feel that there's enough in here to take
Yes.
care of that
Yes.
if it comes up?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Does anybody have any objections to that? Okay, so we can strike that one? Okay.
But why did we make the exceptions? Does anyone recall?
So
Why would
I
the
think what this is saying is within 100 feet of the wetland or the water body, there's no agriculture. So that means obviously no livestock, but also no planting of crops. And is that
I thought it was activity related to agriculture. So it's not the agriculture itself.
Oh, no,
It's
it's-
this related activity.
Well, that's what
well,
that's
it
what
probably
the
should,
wording
it probably
is, yeah.
should say agricultural activity, or just agriculture, I suppose.
Agriculture.
Oh, I
and
read it.
related
Agriculture.
activity.
What?
I see.
Just
Agriculture
No.
and related.
What?
I just didn't read it that way. Because the opening sentence says activity related to agriculture. So I thought you just couldn't hit that area with toxins. You know, you couldn't use the pesticides, the herbicides, the nutrient loading.
No, the intent of this, and the Agriculture Commission saw it, I think they understood what it was. This is no agriculture, no livestock, and no planting of crops.
Okay.
Yeah, so do we have a definition of agriculture? That's a good point.
We do very much have it.
Yeah,
Well,
Yeah, let's take a look at that.
well, there's a whole section,
it's vast.
yeah. Because I think we default to,
It's, storage of soil amendments,
Okay.
preparation for market, irrigation of crops, use of livestock,
And that's in...
storage of compost.
Okay, where
In
is
the
that?
definition, in the zoning ordinance.
Okay.
Farm stand, agritourism. So but that means if you have a farm, there's 100 feet or so, you can't,
it's a buffer essentially.
yeah.
Okay, so should we just change the wording to say...
Yeah, just
Nick
agriculture and
suggested.
activity related to agriculture.
Okay.
Now, but then we have the exception. Does that mean that you could use pesticides within the buffer?
That's how I read it, yeah,
So,
of course.
isn't the intention here that you could have agricultural activity, livestock and planting of crops, but not pesticides anywhere?
Well,
It doesn't
I
say
think when
that,
they're
though.
saying best management practices, that doesn't necessarily say no pesticides, but I think it means that you are using the least amount possible, that you're following all of the directions in order to maintain water quality, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, I don't think it's a blanket no pesticides.
So BMPs for pesticides near a wetland maybe is okay? And the Ag Commission would review it?
Yeah, I think we ran, when we were rewriting this, if I'm recalling this conversation now, that we were deferring to the agricultural folks if they were using best management practices. We were assuming that, they would not be putting massive quantities of fertilizer and pesticide in that buffer area. And that's why that's referenced in here. And then there's the manual of best management practices for agriculture that's referenced. So as long as they're following that, they're probably good to go. So yes, theoretically, they could put pesticides.
But this
in
is
there,
also, a professional is weighing in here.
That's
anyway.
correct.
Yeah.
Right.
That's
So they're not doing it just by their own, I'm following best management practices, therefore I get to
Yeah, that's correct.
make an exception to this.
Where the code
right.
Since it is an exception, there's that extra check in place.
There's a safety valve there.
Yes, indeed.
Okay. Yeah,
All right.
I think that's a good comment, Nick.
I did have a question about the BMP PDF listing. It looks like this page, and then there's also one on page 10, are the only two places where we refer to specific documents in the, everything else, all of the PDFs are in the appendix, which seems like it might be easier to update, 4 years from now when all the links have died. It might be easier to just go through the appendix rather than having to remember it's the appendix plus page 8 and page 10.
Yeah.
So I didn't know if sort of for
Yeah,
housekeeping.
I'm trying to remember,
Right.
some of
Yeah,
this
that's
was
a good
copied
point.
out of, we were editing, in a way, what had already been done previously.
Yeah.
So this is
Easy to
good
refer to.
editorial suggestion.
And
Yeah,
then
so then,
And there's one spot on page 10 as well where we refer to a study on sea level rise and impacts on groundwater levels. And maybe we want to move that one to the appendix as
Oh,
well.
well,
Yes,
it
so the
seems a
same
little
comment.
odd to repeat it. Maybe we should just say parentheses see appendix, even though
Yeah.
we've said that everywhere.
I think we say see reference and appendix. It's what we use with the forestry, for instance.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you suggested.
Yeah. I think that's a good catch.
yeah, I think that's a good point for sure.
Did you
Just
catch
to-
page 10 on that too?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, so same
yeah.
comment.
Same comment on page 10.
Okay. So to move those two links to the appendix and to note in the body here that to see the appendix.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, now we move down to D, septic systems, and the item is to be discussed more whether 125 feet is appropriate. So, do we have any comments on that one? Is 125 feet setback from the reference line
Yeah,
appropriate?
so I dug into the New Hampshire Code of Administrative Rules on this, and the setback for septic tank and bed is 75 feet required by the state. 125 feet is really, from my perspective, more of an ecological reason to do it from the water body, particularly because we know that the Great Bay is already being eutrophied from nutrients seeping into the bay. And so any sort of septic system too close is going to provide a problem there. The third reason, climate change. Sea levels are rising, groundwater is coming up. You put that septic system too close to the bay, it's going to become unfunctional or non-functional over time. So those were the three things that I recall in having that put in there as 125 feet.
Okay.
And that's what it is now. It seems to work.
Yeah.
Should we encourage people to do it more than 125? Setback as far as practical and at a minimum 125?
Yeah,
I mean,
that makes perfect sense. It's
Well, it
good.
also has to do with elevation.
possible, especially given climate changes.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It should at least say at least 125 feet.
Well, the other point is, what if the buffer is greater than 125 feet? So do we still want to let people put a septic system in the buffer? So, we have buffers if we go back and look at our buffer distances that are greater than 125 feet. Bogs, prime wetlands, and rare and exemplary wetland is 200 feet, vernal pools is 150 feet. And, then we have the 330 feet, so I'm just throwing that out as a point of discussion. So do we not allow septic systems in the buffer at all? Or just say follow the buffer? Septic systems are allowed outside the buffer.
Well, there's
at
also a
least
difference
125
whether
feet.
it's a sewer line or a septic line, a septic tank and a leach field. So they're all a little different. The way this is worded now, we have septic systems 125 feet, but then we also allow them by conditional use, which means with a conditional use, you could get a conditional use to be 30 feet away. So we need to clarify how that should be done.
We've had to address that numerous times on small lots, right, next to the water.
Oh, okay, actually what we're saying here under D is the lines, the sewer lines and the septic lines. Oh, okay, the septic system, the septic tank and the leach field must be at least 125 feet away, but by conditional use, you can have the septic lines and the sewer lines anywhere in the area. But if a leach field has to be at least 125 feet.
Yeah.
You cannot get a conditional use for that. So I just need to make it a little more clear in the language. But I think that seems to make sense. That the disposal system must be 125 feet. You cannot get a conditional use, but you can get a conditional use for just the lines.
Yes.
Oh, okay. That's where it says, but not including town sewer lines.
Right.
And, okay, and private septic lines.
So that would be
What
from
does that
the
mean?
house. That would be from the house to the septic tank, and from the septic tank to the leach field.
Okay.
So the lines are more. I think they're more secure than the tank, or certainly the leach field.
Okay, so we don't want to have any constraint to be determined by the size of the buffer, then we're just going to say 125 feet.
Yeah. So they'd have to be. You could not get a conditional use. It's got to be. You'd have to get a variance to be less than 125 feet.
Okay.
But for a replacement system, there's a different process in the next paragraph.
So, just to be clear, the buffer widths as outlined in applicability, like we said, some of those are greater than 125 feet.
Right.
So a new septic system, I mean, and we should spell this out, right? And if this is what we're saying, a new septic system can be within the buffer area.
That's what we're saying.
Right.
That's what we're saying.
Yeah, which I mean, is that okay? If a buffer is 200 feet or 150 feet, is it okay to put a septic system inside the buffer?
Well, we have this qualification in here that it needs to be outside or out, with the required setback, except if the health officer, zoning administrator, code enforcement officer determines that such a location is not physically possible due to the shape or size of the lot, soil conditions, and other constraints peculiar to the site.
Well, that's for the replacement. I'm just making sure that we understand for the new ones as well. The very first paragraph under D. That we're giving kind of tacit permission to install new septic systems and disposal systems within the buffer as long as it's 125 feet away.
Right.
And is that what we want to do?
We're requiring a new single-family home to be at least 150 feet back by conditional use, unless a variance is issued.
Well, that's true. I mean, a leach field is about the most, isn't it about the most damaging thing?
Yeah.
For nitrogen, yeah.
Right. It almost makes sense to, I don't know. This is going to open up that can of worms where we discuss how far away, what the buffer, if the buffer width is too extreme or not. But like, it almost, I kind of want to suggest that 125 feet is the minimum, and the buffer width is, if the buffer width is greater than the minimum, that should be the buffer width.
That would be 330 feet.
I knew I would.
From the
Can of worms,
Yeah.
that's what I said. Yeah, exactly.
Or you could just go to 150 if that's justified, if we can justify that
Well-
as a flat rule.
So does anyone know whether the state reg was 75? Is that what we heard? Right? And
Yes.
is the nitrogen absorbed within that
Right.
75?
Would want to make a suggestion based on science, or does the buffer in the bay document that's been driving a lot of the recommended buffer here say anything on
Septic system?
septic systems?
I'd have to go look. I can't say off the top of my head. But from an ecological standpoint, wetlands are a little less susceptible to eutrophication because there's a lot more biological activity going on in a wetland. Whereas open water, once the nitrogen gets in there, it essentially just fuels phytoplankton and epizootic plants growing on the bottom. So it's a little more of an issue in that regard.
Well, it probably should be at least the setback of the house.
Yeah, that's what I agree with that. I'll have to go back and look at the Bob report on if they talk about septic systems.
Well, I would certainly think 150 feet would be justified, but maybe we can just plan on 150 and try to do some more research in the meantime?
Yeah,
Okay.
makes sense to me. How about,
Okay, so we'll come back to this one then. And then Dwight, you'll have some more info for us?
hopefully, I don't
Next
know if
time.
they actually, they looked at things in general, so I'll look and see what references they may have though on that.
Well, the other thing that we could potentially do is say that if a septic system, tank, or leach field is located inside the buffer, then, a conditional use permit must be obtained.
Well, we do allow, the sewer line and the septic line by conditional use, so that could be, anything. It could be 50, 100 feet. But the leach field and the septic tank would have to be 150.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, let's put that in there and try later on, so you get a little more information. But I would think that would be justified, especially given the house is 150.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we'll come back to this in December then.
Catch.
Okay. Moving on. Okay, so then there was the purple comment at the bottom of page 8, soil conditions, comma, and other constraints peculiar to the site. That seems kind of harmless, right?
Yeah.
Okay. No objection there? Okay. Okay. And then page 9. Okay. I think we're doing well. It's 9:05. Dwight, what do you want to do now?
Well, we had this session scheduled for another 10 minutes,
Okay.
so we could move to permitted uses A and do the same sort of thing, looking at language there, unless someone has a major issue that they want to bring up related to the what's currently written in black.
Okay, so do we just want to take a couple of minutes and allow everybody to read through the permitted use A? Or should
Yes.
we assume that? Okay. Yeah, let's do that.
Because that goes just for this 9 to top of 10,
Yeah, exactly.
and then permitted use B, maybe if people feel they want to try and tackle that.
Okay, so let's take a few minutes and read through permitted use A, uses that do not require review. So meaning that the homeowner, the landowner can just go ahead and do this stuff. Okay, everybody set? Okay. Okay, just open it up for comments. Any comment on number 1? The planting of native or naturalized species to be allowed without review.
I think some punctuation might be appropriate in that one.
Okay,
And maybe a reorganization of the,
what do you suggest, Nick?
well, the planting of native or naturalized species in wetland vegetation, comma, excluding lawns. Within a wetland, and then at the end it says,
right.
so this is saying we're allowed to plant native or naturalized species in wetland vegetation within a wetland, right?
And in the
then
buffer.
it also is saying, and we're allowed to plant native or native or non-native, non-invasive vegetation in the buffer. It just feels like that's a little clunky the way that it's organized.
Right, and it says within a wetland and native or, okay, I'll try to reword that.
I'm also wondering if we want to move that specific reference to the appendix again, which might help streamline some of this.
Yeah, okay, back to
Yeah.
the appendix, yeah.
I'm also wondering if we want to specifically exclude lawns from both wetlands and buffers? Or is the intent here to allow lawns within the buffer?
Yeah, that's a good question. We've had a lot of conversation about lawn in the buffer.
Well, we do say on
Is the-
page
Is six-
7, well, we say, let's see, on page 6, number 2, existing lawns within 30 feet must be reestablished with native vegetation. And then on page 7, number 9, we say within 15 feet of an existing single family, these things don't apply. Meaning you could have a lawn within 15 feet of a house.
I guess the fact that I'm confused after reading number 1, maybe just, we want to clean that up. Yeah, looking at page 7, it certainly seems that we're allowing lawns. No, are we allowing new lawns? We're only allowing existing
Yeah,
lawns.
of an existing single-family house.
Okay, so we're saying that in the buffer, within 15 feet of an existing single-family house, you can have a lawn.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so Ann, can you just describe what you're concerned about here, or what the confusion is with number 1? Aside from the word, from the punctuation part of it. Okay, excluding lawns.
Does that only applies within a wetland?
It only applies, well,
Does it apply within the buffer?
everything that we're saying here is, it applies to the buffer. Am I correct, Michael?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and it should,
This,
I think this sentence only applies the lawns to the wetland. It doesn't apply to the buffer.
well, it should be clarified that we're saying excluding lawns, but, for lawns, see page, 6 and 7. I think we just have to have the reference. It's a little confusing because there's a lot of pieces.
Jumping around.
Yeah.
Because we were trying to streamline the language in this a little bit.
We're making it more confusing.
Yes, clearly.
Okay, so is the confusion or the concern that we are referencing lawns here? Is that the major point
Yeah.
of confusion? Is that?
And, well, certain lawns are native grasses.
But we're saying we exclude lawns.
And is it lawns or is it grasses? Because people plant native grasses.
well, what is it saying? Is it saying that lawns cannot be planted within a wetland?
Lawns cannot be planted in the buffer, or they're not, when we allow native or naturalized species or vegetation, we're not referring to lawns, but lawns are allowed in the prior section in certain circumstances.
So maybe we just take the reference to lawns out of there because we already cover it in a prior section. Because I think it's the lawns part that's kind of the part that's confusing.
Right, maybe if we just have something in here, C, referring them back to the reference to lawns, because that's the guiding. Or maybe we have a separate number, lawns as allowed, in first 15 feet or something like that.
You have to get
Yeah,
the
the other-
definition of lawn.
Yeah, right. I know, is it a native grass, or what do we mean?
Well, yeah, what is the definition of lawn? I think if you're gonna go down this path, you have to go into more detail.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Or do we
have a
really
lawn
need to be
definition in
referring, no, or do we really just need to refer to certain kinds of grasses?
Well, I think by referencing lawn, you're assuming it's going to be mowed and it's going to be maintained and potentially,
Amended.
amended, lime, fertilizer, whatever weed management practice. I think I'm focusing on clover now, so I don't have to mow. So something like that.
Well, the intent of one was to essentially say, if you want to plant native or naturalized species and wetland vegetation on your property,
Go for it.
go for it. You don't need our permission to do that. So that was the intent. And I'm also thinking that maybe moving any reference to the United States Fish and Wildlife Service National List either into a sentence, C blah for appropriate native or naturalized species, or as Ann suggests, moving that to the references in the appendix and somehow referencing it would clean up that sentence a little bit, although the end of it still reads a little awkwardly. Within a wetland and native or not native non-invasive vegetation in the buffer. I trip over that every time I read it. So, but the intent is to allow people to do this without our permission.
Yeah, but not
Excluding lawn,
lawns.
the reason we put excluding lawns was we didn't want people planting lawns within the buffers.
But then we say that they can, if it's within 15 feet of
If
their
it's
house.
within 15 feet, but that was the argument that, people need a buffer.
But I think this sentence does not say that. I think the sentence only says you can't plant a lawn within a wetland. As I'm reading it.
Yeah.
And is lawn the right word, or is it?
Well, we have to define it.
Well, like St. Augustine,
Right.
what if there must be native and naturalized grasses? that
I think
people
it's more
plant.
about the maintenance practices.
And yet we can't really regulate people mowing.
No, well, I'm just saying, it's, what are we trying to restrict there?
Good
It's not
point.
restriction, these are permitted.
Yeah, but by lawn, I'm saying,
Yeah,
what are we
okay.
trying to confine to the term lawn, right? What practices versus,
Well, we do say that you can't
Naturalized,
use
natural
insecticides and herbicides. And if we limit, I'm not sure if, are there grasses that people, native and naturalized, they can plant and then they can mow all the time and it looks like a lawn and,
they used to farm salt marsh grass all along the coast.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly not something that you'd be able to monitor or regulate.
no.
So, I don't know.
Well, maybe we need to find out what native and naturalized, what grasses would be included. They can't use insecticides, but we can't regulate mowing. I think it's pretty hard to, I don't know how we would.
Maybe we just,
Well, does lawn imply that there'd be ability to landscape, right? To smooth out and create, versus leave it natural? We do allow cutting for, you know, other purposes, right? As long as it's not over a certain diameter, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you're going to want to maintain that ability to, you know, manage invasives and other things, right?
Yeah. All right. Guess we need to think more about this.
Yeah.
Well, it's now 9:19. So we're a little over our time right now. We have the buffer because we're not reviewing minutes tonight. So I'm going to suggest that we wrap this conversation up at this point. I personally think we've made a little bit of headway here.
Yes, we're one paragraph further along than we were.
Yeah,
A
but we
month
don't have
ago.
to go back and revisit everything.
That's
Page
right.
one to-
But Michael's rewriting several sections, so I think
Well,
you'll find
not-
yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Backwards.
you're getting through, this is the hardest stuff. A lot of the rest of it's not tough.
Okay. Thank you for the encouragement. Okay, yeah, I think we ought to wrap it up.
Yep. So,
Speaking for myself.
all right, let's move on to other business.
Okay.
Anyone have any other business they want to? The December 23rd meeting date. How many people think they will be able to be here December 23rd, which is a Monday before Christmas?
Okay, let's take a look.
2. I can be here.
On the 23rd?
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm not going anywhere. I can.
that's
make it.
4. Is that a yes?
I can
5,
I'll be here on the
6.
23rd.
I'll probably be here.
7? Okay, so, okay, that sounds like that date's good.
I have another quick other business item. So again, I was not at the meeting last month, but I hear that Ellen Snyder came to discuss some potential collaborative projects that we could do with Conservation Commission in Newmarket. One of those was to apply for a PrEP grant to do some mapping of vernal pools in the Seacoast area, or specifically in Newmarket and in Durham. And partly I was curious to know if there was any discussion amongst the commission after that about whether or not there was appetite to do that. And if folks felt like that was something we'd like to move forward with, I have a group of students who's going to be working with Ellen and Zach Angelini, who's another Conservation Commission member in Newmarket. And one of the ideas for a project they would be doing as a capstone project would be to help write that proposal. So I know for many of us, the idea of actually getting in there and writing a proposal feels like a lot. So I wanted to just check with the commission to see if I was sort of helping to advise those students as well, whether or not you think that would be okay for us to engage in, or
Nice.
whether we should just keep it
Oh,
as
do
a
you know if
Newmarket.
Ellen is going to, because I followed up with Ellen, I haven't heard back yet. Do you know was she going to write the grant for both Durham and Newmarket?
Yeah,
I think it was
that
going to be a collaborative.
That was my sense, was that she put out on the table the idea that, well, maybe the two towns could do this together. We could use the same contractor. So they would go to that contractor and find out, you know, how much it would be to do both of the towns together. She didn't think it was a heavy lift to do that, although I think she was looking for, you know, potentially who from Durham would participate in that activity, and having someone help write the grant would be great, I think.
Okay.
And that would be a good contribution that we could be providing to the project
Yeah.
in a way to get it off the ground.
Okay. Okay. I just wanted to make sure before I sort of moved forward with this potential project idea and got students involved that Durham also wants to be part of that.
Would that be enough of a project for a capstone, or would there
Yeah, I
even
think
some
they would.
follow-up that would be
Yeah, I
part
think
of
there would
it?
be more than just the grant piece. There would be some other, probably interviews and other kinds of things. Maybe looking at just the appetite for getting the communities engaged in doing monitoring work down the line and things like that. But
I guess
Yeah.
I have two comments. One,
Yeah.
maybe reach out to Ellen and see if this would increase her workload. I think this would be fantastic, assuming that the timelines work out. I guess that was my main concern with Ellen's proposal was I didn't know who from Durham was going to be able, especially that we're in between stewardship
Right.
coordinators who here would be able to
Yes.
assist. And so if you have some people who are willing to assist and you're willing to advise them,
Yeah.
seems like it could be great.
Okay.
If the timelines work out.
Okay.
And I guess also if we're thinking about sort of doing a natural resources inventory or having this feed into one, I believe there's parts of that process that include community surveys.
Yeah.
And so maybe the students could help, like that might be,
Yeah.
I'm sure that's what you're already thinking about, but maybe that could sort of be part of that procedure.
Yes,
as
yeah,
well.
I haven't looked into what's entailed in the grant yet, honestly. So I'm just sort of in the beginning stages, trying to figure out what it
And
would
my
entail for
understanding
us.
from the conversation was also that there has to be an element of community engagement as part of the project.
Yeah.
So they were going to do the salamander thing in Newmarket. We had not really identified anything for Durham, so that might be something else.
Well, yeah, there's a whole group of folks who would like to start up a whole salamander brigade initiative for the whole of the seacoast, including Durham. We have a lot of folks at UNH who are already working on salamander monitoring and things like that. But I think, again, the mapping piece is kind of critical to kind of understanding where do we really need to be, where is it going to be most effective, et cetera. So, yeah, I think there's already people, I think, really involved in wanting to get the community engaged. Whether or not that's going to happen like this next year or that needs to follow after we have some initial
But my
data.
understanding was part of the proposal is you have
Oh,
to
needed to
show
include.
in the proposal.
Yes.
You have to include that community engagement piece.
Yes,
And it could be, part of it is, okay, we're going to engage the community to find out where the best options are here.
Yeah.
And with a goal of, at the end of the project, doing something
yes.
that actually.
Yeah, and I think Newmarket is sort of a few steps ahead of us in terms of they're already like all on board in terms of doing salamander brigades
Yes,
and
that's correct.
getting folks on board. And so, yeah, the Durham might not be like right away, but maybe we'll be
But it would be the
down line.
planning to
Yes.
actually do that and engaging people to understand
Yes,
their interest
Yeah.
in that.
for
So.
sure. Yeah.
And that, my last comment on this would be, I think PrEP has their online webinar in mid-January,
Yeah.
unless I have the date. I think Michael sent it around.
Yes, thank
So,
you. Yeah.
anyway.
Just
Yeah.
one question. I forgot to ask Ellen last month, though. Would we be looking at public and private lands for this survey?
Good
And-
question. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's one of the
Yeah.
questions
She
we.
said-
No, it would be everything.
She said,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
She did.
But we
Those
had to get-
private landowners that opted in.
Yeah,
Okay, so we would go after certain parcels that we think we'd want private
Yeah.
landowners to engage.
but they have to be on board in order for it to happen.
That makes sense. I
We
mean,
won't tell them about the proposed setback from Burlington
until after.
until
Right,
after.
till
Right
afterwards.
afterwards.
Oh,
Surprise.
congratulations.
We'll mark it out for you while we're there. How's that?
Right.
Okay, roundtable. I have one thing. The seminar that Alexander Kasiba gave and the nature walk through Doe Farm was very, very informative to me, at least. There were two publications that she had that I thought were useful for us as a group. This 12 Steps for Climate Resilience, Managing Your Forests. I think there's some interesting, very simple steps in here that, anytime we start dealing or thinking about forestry things, keeping those things in mind, particularly the role of forests in managing carbon storage and sequestration, I think is an important thing. And then she had another publication, which was a guide to forest carbon in the Northeast, which is essentially a compilation of two papers that she wrote that are in one place. Both of these publications are available, I only had one copy of this, from the University of Vermont Cooperative Extension website. So if you're interested, I have those PDFs, I downloaded them, I can share them with Michael and he can send them around.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, so But I thought it was a very informative and useful use of the resources that we put into that. So I think definitely we should be looking to try and do this every couple of months, or 3 or 4 months.
Thanks to Sarah, who's not here for.
Yeah, exactly,
The
for
organizing.
coordinating, putting it together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know there weren't that many people who came to the talk, but it was recorded, so maybe that's
Yeah.
something we could do, is do a little figuring out how do we make that accessible to people. Yeah. Put it in the Friday updates, something like that.
We don't have a regular posting in the Friday updates.
We don't.
Conservation matters.
That's I think a good point. There was something towards the end of one of the town in the last couple weeks that they had something on this Conservation Commission information there.
Sarah
You could have a
occasionally
regular
posted-
slot for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who will do it? and-
Yeah, well, that's the thing. That's the identified.
Maybe it's a 2025 thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
It's certainly
take
not a
turns.
9:30 at night,
No.
end of November thing.
So, any other roundtable information people want to share? You've got 30 seconds. If not, meeting's adjourned unless I hear otherwise. Those opposed?
Right.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.